I have a love-hate relationship with the stories where the main character is like head and shoulders above the rest of the cast. You know, the characters who hold the solution to all of the story's problems but just can't seem to get their point across. It happens whenever the other characters can't understand them, don't want to understand them, or literally just can't hear them, and it's always so frustrating. Hence the hate in love-hate. But the love more than makes up for it. After a lot of effort and a lot of ingenuity, these characters always find the most satisfying ways to get their brilliance out, which is exactly what we're going to be talking about in today's video. So this video is actually part 2 in my series on protagonists, but don't worry if you haven't seen part 1. To catch you up to speed, the gist is that protagonists exist to push their stories forward when nobody else can. This is possible through 3 traits that they all share. The first is competence. Use their abilities to find the path to success. Second is resolve. Pave a way forward when a path doesn't present itself. The third and final trait is influence. Have access to a lot of different paths in the form of different characters. See, one downside to this chart is that it only shows a protagonist at one given moment, but protagonists tend to change a lot. After giving this some thought, however, I actually realized it's an upside of this chart. By using it to pinpoint a protagonist at the start of their story, we can visualize what they might be lacking, giving us an idea of where the story might go. With this in mind, I want to introduce the first official category within the Squampopulous protagonist chart, the pioneer. Characters who know precisely where they're going, exactly how to get there, but have no idea how to convince people to follow. These characters have the resolve and they have the competence, but the crux of their problems lie in communication gaps, roadblocks in the form of other people. It kind of reminds me of trying to book a doctor's appointment. You finally decide to handle that one thing you've been putting off, and suddenly you're stuck playing phone tag with 3 different people, trapped in hold music purgatory. Which is why I'm happy to share today's sponsor, ZocDoc, a free website that helps you find quality doctors and book appointments with just a few clicks. So I've just graduated college, which means it's time for me to be more proactive about my health. But that's easier said than done. The last time I booked a doctor's appointment, I was sent down a 30-minute rabbit hole filled with elevator music and confusion before learning that the website I was using wasn't even up to date. ZocDoc makes this hassle a thing of the past. With over 100,000 in-network doctors at your fingertips, ZocDoc makes it way easier to take action on what you already know you need. No middlemen, no getting put on hold, just a clear path forward. From mental health, dermatology, eye care, or just a regular checkup, ZocDoc helps you connect with any type of care you need. To ensure they're right for you, ZocDoc lets you filter by insurance and location, as well as by rating. This removes any guessing games and gives you confidence in your doctor's verified quality. ZocDoc also removes the waiting game. Rather than waiting months for any opening, ZocDoc lets you see the availability yourself and choose a time that works for you, typically getting you seen within 24 to 72 hours. So put your health first and go to ZocDoc.com/Squampopulous. Also linked in the description to find and instantly book a top-rated doctor today. Thanks again to ZocDoc for being a sponsor. Now let's get back to the video. As a doctor in linguistics whose entire life is centered around communication, it's a bit ironic that Louise Banks tops my list of characters who can't get their point across. But it's at no fault of her own, which is what makes it so frustrating at times. Because when an alien race touches down on Earth for the first time, it's actually the humans in the movie Arrival who are their own biggest threat, and it's Banks who has to save them from themselves. But let's not get ahead of ourselves. I think for these analyses to work best, we need to get an understanding of these characters' respective competence, resolve, and influence weights to see where they first land on the chart. So the reason Banks is called up in the first place is actually a result of her influence, but after setting the story in motion, influence really takes a back seat. In the early scenes, her competence keeps her around when the story tries to kick her out. She separates herself from other candidates by actively using her understanding of language. Furthermore, her resolve is what keeps her going in this high-stress, high-stakes, highly confusing environment. I'd probably say the split is about 60% competence, 30% resolve, and 10% influence, but the exact numbers don't really matter as long as it's clear that influence is her Achilles heel, which the other characters in the movie make abundantly clear it is. Feeling pressures from other nations as well as a general sense of threat, the leaders in charge of the site urge Banks to stop wasting time and just find out what the aliens want, even though that's obviously not how it works. So not only does Banks have to teach aliens English from scratch, but she also has to teach her superiors the most rudimentary basics of communication as well. Herein lies her central challenge: get everyone to understand each other. A near impossible task made even more difficult when you consider her rank as a lowly doctor. In the meantime, though, she can rely on competence and resolve to keep the story going while she works on building up influence. When nobody is capable of getting, well, anything from the aliens, Louise gets the first domino to fall by introducing written symbols. The aliens respond with their own logograms, and the floodgates finally open. This is competence at its finest. When no other character knew what to do, Banks used her expertise to find the path forward. As their understanding of the heptapod's language grows greater, so does a rising sense of fear among humanity. But Banks refuses to give in to that cynical, conflict-based mindset. Anytime war or competition is brought up, Banks always offers a different perspective. This is her resolve at play. Everyone around her is indoctrinated with conflict-centric thinking. Despite this, Louise clings to the belief that cooperation beats conflict, and the belief that the heptapods aren't there to conquer humanity. This resolve brings her face to face with the heptapods, where she finally masters their language. So now she knows exactly what the heptapods came for, exactly how to solve humanity's problems, but still needs to change everyone's mind in order to do so. This is like the defining moment for any character in this pioneer category. Through an act of resolve, she locks herself in a room and uses her unique competence to call the leader of China. Finally, in an act of influence, she convinces him to stand down and share their findings with the world. At last, all three traits are balanced within Banks, and at last, the conflict is resolved. From a writing perspective, I wouldn't say that Banks had to learn to be influential, and I don't think it was like adding influence as an ingredient to her character either. I think a better way to look at it is that when a character has such strong competence and resolve, influence is inevitable. This supports the idea that, as the story goes on, the three traits will naturally find a balance. And so, by the end of the movie, Dr. Louise Banks equally exhibits each competence, resolve, and influence, cementing her as the perfect protagonist in an unforgettable story. If I told you that I was going to follow up Arrival with a similar movie called Ratatouille, you'd probably think I had too much of Chef Skinner's La Tour 1961. But in a video focused on competent and resolute protagonists, it'd be a crime to overlook Remy the rat, which is ironically what the entire plot of Ratatouille is. Remy's underappreciated genius. The driving forces in Ratatouille are Remy's prolific cooking abilities, aka his competence, and his unapologetic dream to become a chef, aka his resolve. What's holding him back is, well, he's a rat. In the first video on protagonists, I described influence as a sort of magnetism. In Remy's case, he has the exact opposite. Among humans at least, he actually has a natural repulsion. But as the son of the chief, he does have at least some influence in the rat community, who completely disregard his idea that there's more to life than just surviving. At the start of the story, I'd probably pin him about here. 50% competence, 40% resolve, 10% influence. Main takeaway, he's a pioneer. What really sets the story in motion is his own delusional resolve. His imaginary Gusteau leads him straight to the restaurant, where he then uses his competence to save a dish. This opens a door for Remy and invites a story to unfold. At first, he bails, but his resolve gets the best of him, and he takes the opportunity. What actually enables Remy to cook at Gusteau's is Linguini's strangely controllable autonomy. Side note, I don't know if you would call this competence as much as a convenience, but I don't really care either, because it's not like all the problems magically go away. It just puts Remy in a position to solve them. For instance, Chef Skinner asks them to serve guests an infamously bad dish. While other characters want to simply follow orders, Remy's adherence to his beliefs, as well as his ability to save a meal, help him convert a known failure into a coveted special. Moments like that gradually add up, and suddenly Gusteau's is back in the fine dining scene. But if you've watched my video on character duos, you may know that one of the best things a writer can do with a duo is split them up, which is what happens to the iconic duo in Ratatouille. But after they outlast their breakup, it's now them against the world. With his back against the wall and the staff out the door, Remy has to feed an entire restaurant and impress the unimpressible Ego. This time, though, something's different. His father saw how far he was willing to go for his dream. He saw Remy's resolve. With that in mind, and the fact that they're family, Remy's influence finally pushed the story forward because now he had an entire clan of sous chefs. He was starting to balance competence and resolve with influence, and it was coming at the perfect time. Guided by Remy's expertise and passion, Gusteau's was able to please Ego with the now iconic Ratatouille dish. And while the whole being a rat thing did get the restaurant shut down, Remy's influence remained. Ego helped fund a new restaurant where Remy could work freely, creating a perfect happy ever after. Much like Dr. Banks in Arrival, I don't think it's accurate to say that Remy had to learn to be influential. It was just a trait that inevitably came along following his competence and resolve. He pioneered the way forward for both rats and mankind, and although it might have taken all movie to do so, he eventually got them to follow. While trying to come up with a name for this pioneer character trope, one of the earlier ideas I had was the overlooked character. But I thought that term had too much of a negative connotation and felt that calling them pioneers did a better service toward their brilliance. But with this next character, I think that calling him overlooked is generous. Hiccup from How to Train Your Dragon started with an influence factor comparable to Remy the rat. At the start of the movie, we quickly learn that he kind of ruins everything he touches. Nobody wants anything to do with him, and you almost can't blame them. He's the antithesis of what it means to be a Viking, but we can immediately see something that the other characters can't. Where he lacks competence and fighting ability, he more than makes up for it with his smarts, which is how he captures Toothless the Night Fury, setting the entire story into motion. But the story would have quickly ended if it weren't for Hiccup's resolve too. Had he just finished Toothless right then and there, he would have gotten the respect he so badly wanted, but what he wanted more was to do the right thing. This is resolve, clinging to a belief despite all the pressures against it. On the protagonist chart, I'd probably give Hiccup a 55 in competence, a 40 in resolve, and toss him 5% for his ability to sway Toothless. But in order to really spark change in this story, Hiccup will need to influence a lot more than just one dragon. While he may be on Toothless's good side, that really does nothing when Toothless can't even leave this grotto, which means it's time for some competence to come into play. Hiccup crafts an attachment for Toothless's tail, which enables them to fly. And through his time with Toothless, he gradually learns more and more about dragons, which comes to his aid during his training. He shoots from the bottom of his class to the star pupil seemingly overnight because he's the most competent character when it comes to understanding dragons. With his newfound ability, he gains himself a lot of clout, but I want to make a distinction between fame and influence. What Hiccup has here is just fame. People like being around him because he's the new big shot. What he doesn't have, however, is influence. He can't actually change these people's minds. This is made clear during his final test. Guided by his resolve to prove that dragons are harmless, Hiccup lowers his weapons in front of the entire village. And since he lacks influence, this all backfires in his face. The townspeople capture Toothless, Hiccup is disowned by his father, and it seems like he's somehow worse off than he was at the very start. This is why I consider this trope so frustrating. We all know he's right, but he can't seem to prove it. But he has sparked change in some characters. Having shown Astrid the wonders of dragons, Hiccup's influence, at least among the other students, is enough to spark some hope. He shares his findings among his peers, and together they go try to save the Vikings from their own self-destructive arrogance. At this point, Hiccup's 3 protagonist traits are nearing a balance, but he has to influence everyone or the conflict will never end. Lucky for him, the stage is set to show the Vikings the truth. I actually go over this entire finale in my video about underdog fight scenes, so if you want a more in-depth analysis, check out that when you can. The main idea is that with his immense dragon knowledge, his courage to fight for his beliefs, and his newfound followers, Hiccup and Toothless are able to save everyone. And with that, he had achieved balance. Not just within his own character, but within his world as well. He successfully ended a generational war between man and dragon because he was smart enough and brave enough to teach them better ways. For the last example, I want to go over the protagonist Mark Watney in The Martian. His situation is a bit different from the rest of my examples, but I think it's still clear that he fits in this pioneer category because his competence and resolve are what turn a tragedy into a triumph. I mentioned at the start that pioneers will lack influence for a multitude of reasons. As we've seen in prior examples, they're usually just ignored. But in Mark's case, the other characters simply can't hear him. In fact, they think he's dead. So to save his own life, he needs to find a way to build up influence. But first, he just needs to survive. With the odds stacked against him and nobody coming to his rescue, his only way to move forward is through his determination and his brilliance. Or as Watney put it,
I'm gonna have to science the shit out of this.
Watney makes it clear he has no intention of dying when he rips the shrapnel from his torso and mends his own wound. How's that for resolve? But no matter how bad he wants it, surviving won't just happen. He has to strategically save himself, which is where his competence comes in. So at the earlier stages of the film, I think it's safe to pin Watney at the extreme end of pioneers. Maybe 50% competence, 50% resolve, and a whopping 0% influence. Often categorized as competence porn, The Martian is known for its moments of extreme problem solving. It's like if you give a mouse a cookie on steroids. With his first task, Watney needs to establish a sustainable food source. As a botanist, he's uniquely capable of making this happen with the slim resources at hand. With the rations of potatoes left over from the crew, he knows how to turn a few into a lot. But to do so, he needs water. On Mars, a planet that doesn't rain. While most people would just quit, Mark instead has the drive needed to keep moving forward, especially when his methods don't work out as intended, which is where his brains come to the rescue too. He knows exactly what causes mistakes as well as how to fix them, resulting in water. With a sustainable food source now achieved, Mark has a little bit of wiggle room to start solving that communication problem halting his influence. And as we've learned throughout this video, wherever there's enough resolve and competence, influence is sure to follow. Eventually, through satellite imagery, workers at NASA see evidence that Mark Watney is alive. Then, by acquiring the old Pathfinder probe, using a hexadecimal code system to communicate, and hacking the HAB, he had established complete communications with Earth. Naturally, everyone wanted to bring him home, and they were willing to invest a lot of resources. This is true influence, meaning he had finally balanced all 3 traits. But unlike the previous examples, the story doesn't end here just because he's reached balance. Which brings up a really important point regarding this framework. Clearly, a protagonist can and will move around this chart as their story progresses, but that doesn't mean a story has to end when they reach the middle. If anything, it might suggest that the story's at its best, because it's being driven by a protagonist who has a wide array of options to lean into. This is a good thing though. It means no 2 pioneer stories will be the same. In the case of The Martian, it meant we still had an entire second half of a movie left of genius problem solving and the indomitable human spirit. And just because Mark's influence was now up, didn't mean he could hit the brakes on the other 2 traits. From broken airlocks destroying his entire food system to failed supply drop launches, none of it's enough to stop Mark when he's got resolve, competence, and of course now influence. So that sums up the most frustrating yet satisfying trope I see in main characters. We like when they're right, hate when people won't listen, but love the journey it takes to get them to follow. If you've loved the journey explaining this pioneer trope, I ask that you like and subscribe. The next video will be about characters lacking resolve, but having competence and influence, so leave some suggestions below if you want a character featured. As always, thanks for watching.